Next feast then, Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's on page 5 of your notes from last week. You see in the 13th chapter of Exodus, we see in the 13th chapter of Exodus where God tells us about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And starting in verse 6, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast of the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. And no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, This is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up out of Egypt. This feast lasted an entire week, and it started on the 15th of Nisan and would have gone to the 21st of Nisan. The Passover meal that they would have eaten the night that Passover was the 14th of Nisan, and then they had their Passover meal at sundown that night. That meal actually is ate at the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's eaten on the sun had set, so it's now the 15th and the start of this next feast. So, what happened on this day in history? Jesus was put into the tomb on this day. And this was also the day that the Israelites started their trek out of Egypt.
They were leaving.
What's that?
They were leaving.
Yes.
Leaving, yeah.
Yep. Yep. They were instructed to put blood on the doorposts the day before, and then stay in their house all through that night. And then the next morning is when they would have left, and that would have been the start of unleavened bread. Also on this, you can turn that down just a little bit, Melanie. Also on this day, there would be some preparations made for the next feast, the Feast of First Fruits. On this day, this would be about the time that the barley harvest would start around Jerusalem. So on this day, the priests would go out and they would cut the first sheaf of the barley harvest. And then this sheaf that they cut on this day would be used the next day on the Feast of First Fruits. The Israelites would use these feasts as teaching examples for their families. And one of the opportunity, they took this opportunity to teach their kids about the history of the Exodus and God's purpose with us removing leaven from our houses and our person. And what they would do as they prepared for this feast is they would remove all the leaven from the house. They'd make a big deal as they got closer to Passover of cleaning the entire house and removing all signs of leaven. And they would even go to the extent that the mothers would scrub all their pots and pans so that there weren't any signs of leaven. And this leaven that they were using most likely was a sourdough. They didn't have a bottle of yeast or a package of yeast that they could open and use. So it most likely was a sourdough starter. And they would remove all of the sourdough starter and scrub all their pots and pans, and they would eat only unleavened bread for this entire week.
I have never been able to find the reason behind the unleavened, what was so wrong with it. Have you found it?
The leaven is symbolic of sin.
Oh, okay.
So they were making themselves holy to start celebrating these,
Alright.
these feasts. Yeah.
So I don't know what sourdough starter is. Is that like a powder? Were they trying to get rid of powder? Were they trying to get rid of the smell? Or were they trying to get rid of?
If you, there's natural yeasts floating in the air. So if you take flour and you put some water in it so that you've got
Dough.
a dough, and you just let it sit out, it will naturally start rising just because of the yeast that's in the air that will come into it. So that's how they would have made their breads. They would have got this sourdough started, and then tomorrow when they go to make another loaf of bread, they take some of that sourdough starter and put it in their new dough, and that will make it rise.
What they call friendship breads now.
Yeah.
They sent them out, let them do that.
Yeah.
When I make sourdough, I add sugar to mine.
Yeah.
That'll help speed up the process, because that's what the yeast ferment the sugars and turn it into carbon dioxide and make it rise.
So they had no refrigeration, so they were just leaving it out on the table to make it this sourdough starter or whatever.
Didn't even have it with me.
And like in the Old West, in the days of the Old West, as the families came west, their sourdough starters were that was a valuable commodity, and they made sure that they
You can't put a portion.
kept their sourdough starters so that they could keep making bread.
So this would have been a hardship for the Jewish people then, because they would have had to have started this whole process all over again after they'd gotten rid of all this leavening.
Yeah, because there wouldn't have been any leaven left in these houses, so yeah, every year they would have had to have.
Where did they get their start over then after the 7 days and they could go back to eating leavened bread? Where did the yeast
It
come
takes
from?
about 3 days sitting on the
There's-
cabinet to start.
Yeah, there's natural yeast in the air that just would naturally fall. If you make a bowl, if you take a bowl of flour and put some water in it, so that you've got a dough consistency, or cake batter consistency, and you just let that sit out, natural yeast will fall into that, and like Brenda said, over several days' time, you'll create your own starter.
So they actually would have 7 and then three or 4 more days. So that would have been a good object lesson for them, because it would have been a hardship.
If they added a sweetener, then that made it work quicker.
Quicker, yeah. Yeah, they might have.
They have honey.
They wouldn't have had sugar, but they might have had honey. So they would make a big deal, the family would, of removing all the leaven from the household. And the mother would always take one little pinch from this sourdough starter and hide it. And then the father and all the kids, they would search the whole house in the days leading up to this feast to try to find that little piece of leaven that they hid. And the father would take a candle and he would search, the kids and him with this candle would search all through the house looking for this little piece of leaven. And when they found the leaven, he would sweep it up with a feather. He made sure that he didn't touch the leaven. He'd sweep it up with a feather onto a wooden spoon. And then they would wrap that ball of leaven into a linen cloth, and they would throw it outside the house. Everybody was doing the same thing, and everybody would throw it in one big communal pile, and then they would burn that the next day. So what's the symbolism involved in the feather and the spoon and the cloth and throwing it out of the house?
So sin wouldn't rub off on them.
Okay?
Did the wooden spoon represent the cross of any?
Yes. So the wooden spoon was symbolic of the cross. The feather is symbolic of the Holy Spirit. If we look in Psalms 91, Psalms 91, verse 4. And he shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. How about the linen cloth? What's the linen cloth symbolic of?
You know, Joseph of Arimathea brought a linen shroud and wrapped Jesus' body.
Yep.
What?
If we look in Mark, chapter 15.
Did they do that for everyone, or was it just special for Jesus to have a linen cloth?
I think they used it for most
I
cases.
think everybody, yeah.
Mark,
15.
They did what was customary for everyone.
Yeah. Let's see.
I guess to me, the thing that seems odd is that, I mean, with us, it's always family. And with Christ, it was always other people that took care of him. It wasn't really his family. But he really wasn't, and Mary was there
Mhm.
and stuff, but other people stepped up and.
Yeah, and his brothers didn't believe who he was until after he had risen and saw that.
I may have not got the right one.
What's that?
I may have not got the right one.
No, Mark 15,
46.
46.
Oh.
And this is talking about Joseph of Arimathea. And then he brought fine linen and took Jesus down and wrapped him in the linen and laid him in the tomb, which had been hewn out of the rock. How about the candle that the Father used to search out for this leaven? What would the candle be symbolic of?
That's word of God. And that's the only reason I know the answer.
Well, I was thinking maybe the light. You know, we always compare Jesus to being the light.
Mm-hmm. In Psalms 119, verse 105, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path.
Yes.
So it is kind of speaking about Jesus and the word that he brings.
You know, you say his brothers didn't believe that he was who he was till after he rose from the dead. But yet Mary, the mother, you know, she had to know from conception or non-conception, whatever the right word would be, that there was. And Joseph, if he believed his wife, I mean Joseph, and so whether they didn't, who they shared it with or who they didn't share it with, but I mean.
Maybe they didn't know the full story
I
yet.
think
Well, it said that Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart.
Hidden in her heart.
So it may not have been anything she publicized all that much.
I don't know, can you imagine though growing up in a household where this kid was the son of God? And you're going, yeah, right.
Yeah. He's as honored as you are.
Well, they definitely would have believed the conception of it,
Right.
Yeah.
so.
It was kind of a secret, because when he was 12, you know, he went to the temple, but then you never hear anything else about that. He went to any temples and preached with anyone else in his community or whatever until he was older, so it's almost like it was a secret, like maybe they weren't supposed to know.
Well, and even when she asked him to change the wine, the
Yeah.
water and the wine, he said, it's not my time yet. So she was already pushing him ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, she says,
Us
whatever he tells you to do, you do it.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, he was the oldest brother, though,
Yeah.
so that gave him, like,
Yeah.
I don't think, had I been in Mary's place, I wouldn't have talked about his birth to the other kids, because
Right.
look at the stigma of being born out of wedlock. It was a really horrid thing back then, so.
Yeah, and that, they would have kept
And she
things
would
quiet.
want to protect him and protect the other kids from that.
Mhm.
Well, just like the Pharisees later, in their arguments with Jesus said, we weren't born out of fornication. When they were talking to Jesus. So I'm sure the story had circulated about his conception.
The leaven that they looked for, and this goes back to Judy's question, the leaven was representative of sin. And we see this in a couple of places. We'll look at one here now, and we'll look at another one later today if we can get to it. But in 2 Corinthians 5:21, it says, "For he, God, made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us, that we might become righteous of God in him." All right, now, the story of Jesus and chasing the money changers out of the temple. That happened at the same time as they were preparing for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because all the time that Jesus was growing up, him and his family would have been doing this. They would have been searching for the leaven and removing it in their house. So when Jesus came to the temple, right ahead of Passover, he goes into the temple and he chases all the money changers out. And all that he was doing there was removing the leaven from his father's house. We see that there's no temple now, but we see that today we are the temple. We are Christ's temple. So we should be clearing the leaven out of our bodies. If we look in 1 Corinthians 3, verses 16 and 17. "Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy. Which temple are you?" And then in 1 Corinthians 5, verses 1 and 2, and then 6 and 8. This is the other passage talking about leaven that I was talking about before. So starting in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, "It is actually reported there that there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality as is not named among the Gentiles." And then in 2, "And you are puffed up, you have leaven in you. You have not rather mourned that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you." And if we skip down into looking at 6, 7, and 8, "Your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So this goes back to that sourdough starter. All it took was a little lump of that sourdough starter that you put into a new batch of bread to leaven the entire new batch, where just one little sin that we start committing opens the door to a whole wide array of sins. All right, any questions? We're moving right along today.
Just the fact that leaven or yeast comes back naturally almost seems like a miracle. I mean, a wonder, or, you know.
Yeah.
God provided everything they needed. It was so simple,
Mhm.
but yeah, it was really
But
extraordinary.
by the same token, it's like sin, it's all around us, and if we're not on guard, it can settle on us and be a bad thing rather than a good thing.
Right.
Oh, yeah, and then grow, that's what we're getting credit for. You know, all these feasts, very clever way to share their faith with people who didn't read or write, or people who were not well educated. This is a great way for them to keep this going, and especially the way that they were all scattered and traveled around. These were just great symbols that God had given them to pass this knowledge down.
Well, and as a method of teaching the children.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at the next feast, Feast of First Fruits. This feast actually occurs during the week of unleavened bread. If you look in Leviticus 23, verses 9 through 14. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I give to you, reap its harvest. Then you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And then it goes on to tell what the offering is. So this is the day after the Sabbath. And you remember the first day of unleavened bread, that's a Sabbath, a special Sabbath in and of itself. This Sabbath that they're talking about here, though, if you go back to the original Hebrew, is plural. So that implies that not only the first day of unleavened bread had to happen, but also the regular weekly Sabbath had to have happened. So this Feast of First Fruits would be the day after their weekly Sabbath. So in the year that Christ was crucified, this would have happened on Sunday. First day of the week. So on this day in history, Christ resurrected. But interestingly enough, something else also happened on this day in history. Go clear back to Genesis chapter 8 and verse number 4.
Okay, I'm confused.
Okay?
You said that this happened the day after Christ died, but yet he was in the grave 3 days.
Feast of First Fruits happens the day after the Sabbath.
Oh, after the Sabbath, okay, okay.
So however you want to think that Christ, whichever day you want to think Christ was crucified, whether Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday.
Okay. And this happened after the Sabbath, okay.
Yeah, so after the special Sabbath of the first day of unleavened bread, and after the regular weekly Sabbath, on the first day of the week when Mary came to the tomb, Christ was risen.
Okay,
And that's this day,
okay.
first fruits. In Genesis 8, chapter 8, verse 4, Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. Now, who can make the connection between the 7th month, 17th day in Genesis and,
It's after the 40 days of the flood.
right?
That's in the dove came back with the olive branch.
right? Feast of First Fruits happens in Nisan, right?
Mhm.
So who can make the connection between Nisan after the Exodus and the 7th month before the Exodus?
Was it the same time of the year?
Was it?
I don't know.
You're the only one that knows, that's why the rest of us are here.
You say the 7th month before the Exodus?
Nissan's the first month.
When the ark come to rest after the flood, that was,
Well, it all depends on whether you're going by the secular calendar or the religious calendar.
right,
Nisan would be the 7th month after Rosh Hashanah, or the secular New Year.
right. So turn back to this chart.
Okay, so Nissan's the first.
Okay, at the time of the flood, they only had one calendar. They only had the secular or the civil calendar. And that would have started with Tishri being the first month. Okay? Everybody understand that? That's the third column.
Nissan's the 7th.
Nissan would be the
Okay.
7th.
When Exodus occurred, God gave the people their religious calendar. And now all of a sudden he says, Nisan is to be the first month of your religious calendar. Okay? So, if you apply this religious calendar back to the time of the flood, Nisan would have been the 7th month. So what happened on Nisan 17 at the time of Christ?
That would have been first fruits, wouldn't it?
That would have been first fruits. So the same day that Christ rose, Nisan 17, is the same day that the ark came to rest on solid ground after the flood.
Solid ground, solid ground.
You understand?
The 17th is the 7th month. Is that what you're saying?
17th day of the 7th day.
Oh, okay.
That's when the ark
That's when the park was.
came to rest on Mount Ararat.
After the waters had receded.
Yes.
It stayed there for a while, right? It had to stay there while the waters went down.
Yes. Yeah.
But this would have been when it first came to rest on the ground, not after the waters receded,
Oh, okay.
wouldn't it?
Well, the waters would have started receding
Yeah.
in order for the ark to have settled back down on solid ground. But nobody had left the ark
Nobody
yet
left the
at
ark.
this point. It just
And that was the same day as Christ died? No.
No,
was
it's
It
not.
resurrected.
was resurrected.
What is
What
that?
coincidence, whoa.
You can bring forward those weird things, like where something weird happened on the same day that something else happened.
Yeah.
Do you think that God obviously planned all these things?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like,
That's
it's like
amazing.
Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the month of Av,
Uh-huh.
was the day that all of the temples were destroyed.
And look at how
Solomon's
many-
temple was destroyed on that date, and so was Herod's.
Mhm. And look at how many other things bad have happened on that day.
How many days is in between these two, the ark and the first fruit? I mean, years.
Long time.
Yeah, I figured.
when was the flood, like 1900 some BC?
You know, I don't know. It wouldn't have been any more recent than that, I don't think.
It probably would have been close to 2,000 years between these two events.
Well, David, or the temple was built, Solomon's temple was built 1,005 years before Christ.
The Exodus was about 1400 BC. So we would have still been before that. So on this day, on Feast of First Fruits, they cut this would be celebrating the barley harvest. The day before, the priest had gone out across the Kidron Valley and they had cut a sheaf of barley. And everybody knows what a sheaf is, right?
It's the
Bundle.
It's just a bundle.
Oh, bundle, okay.
A bundle of the
It's not just a leaf of it, it's a bundle.
yeah, it's a whole bundle. Okay, so the high priest would have cut this bundle the day before, and he would have presented it at the temple on this day. And it was presented as an offering in Leviticus 23. This first sheaf of the barley harvest was representative of the entire rest of the harvest. You know, they cut this first sheaf, so that was signifying that God was going to provide all the rest of the barley harvest to them from there on.
And this first sheet, it must not have been very big, because that's what they weighed, isn't that what I typed later on?
Yeah, I'd assume like
Yeah.
that big.
Like one whole stalk or something, maybe.
Well, a bunch of
Bunch of stalks, okay.
Yeah.
But big enough so that you could wave it, but little enough so you could wave it, but big enough that, yeah.
Yeah. And we want to look at a couple more passages.
What did they do with all this stuff they brought to the temple? Did the temple use that? Is that how the temple people ate, or did they
Yeah.
get rid of it? Did they burn it? What did they do with all these offerings, the first fruits?
This was just a wave offering, and it would be, the high priest would wave it. And then I don't know if they,
So did each family?
would they have used that as a burnt offering then too, or if that was just strictly a wave offering?
Well, it says that the priests ate from the sacrifices. So I don't think they burned the entire sacrifice, like a meat offering, for instance.
Right.
They did burn the entire animal, and they butchered the rest of it, and that was for the priests and their families to eat. And I'm sure the grain offerings were the same way. Some of them were.
Now, was this per household that they did the Feast of the Fruits, or was it a congregation?
No, that was a congregation deal, the way I understand it. Turn to Acts chapter 26. Acts 26, verse 23. Now that Christ would suffer, that he would be the first to rise from the dead, and would proclaim light to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. So here we see Christ was the first fruits and gave hope to the Jews and the Gentiles because of this. We also see in Psalms 126, Psalms 126, verse 6. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. So these sheaves, not only were they the representative of the barley harvest, but they also represented the people. A sheaf was symbolic of a person. So that old song, bringing in the sheaves, what that's talking about is Christ's second coming and the harvest of all the saved souls that he takes back with him. There's a couple more passages here that you can look at. Let's skip down to 1 Corinthians 15. Corinthians 15, verses 20 to 23. But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since man came death, by man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all died, even so in Christ all shall be made alive. But each one in his own order. Christ the first fruits, afterward those who are Christ's at his coming. Us. Yep.
You've looked ahead in this, but so every one of these feasts then actually just became Christ? I mean, Christ fulfilled it. Every one of these feasts has now become just Christ.
Christ has fulfilled each one of these feasts on the day of the feast. On the day that they celebrated the feast, all through the spring feasts. And we'll see, we'll get started here this morning on Pentecost. We'll see that actually happened when they celebrated Pentecost. When we get to the fall feasts, none of those have been fulfilled yet. Yeah, so what I'm thinking is, and I think there's a lot of people that agree that the spring feasts represent Christ's first coming and the fall feasts represent Christ's second coming. And when we start looking at the symbolism of the fall feasts and what they do, we can tie some of that back to Revelation and the sign, what John saw. What John saw and that he writes about in Revelation is some of the same things that the priests do to celebrate the fall feast.
Okay, now I got a question for Bruce. Bruce, you're my resident Jewish person. How come the Jewish people missed all of this symbolism? I mean, they're really into their universities and their education and stuff. How do they miss this?
Well, I think Paul explained that when he said that blindness has in part come upon the Jews until the time the number of Gentiles is fulfilled. Because of their hardness of heart and their stubbornness, God set them aside.
But then they didn't have the written word. We have the written word to go back and forth. They just had word of mouth. I mean, they were passing all these stories.
Well, no, at the
They
time,
had the Old Testament.
at the time of Christ, it was all written down.
Yeah, I guess it was.
And now they have it.
And now they have it, yeah, now they have it, but,
Have you read Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Jesus?
No.
It's pretty interesting. I always thought the cross had a T, but he said that actually the T didn't have that little top piece. It was just a regular T. I thought that was interesting. So that every cross you see has a T.
Right. Let's look real quick at Pentecost.
and that's the new.
Yeah, that's the new handout. And there probably isn't anything in this new handout or what we're going to talk about isn't in this new handout. We'll look at this board here real quick. Has anybody heard of counting the Omer?
This one what you said?
Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't hear that word before.
Okay. Well, Omer is the Hebrew word for sheaf.
Sheep for sheep.
Sheaf.
O-N-E-R?
Oh, yeah, O-N-E-R.
Sheep or sheep?
Sheep.
Sheep, okay. Okay.
Counting the sheep.
Okay, so first fruits was bringing in the first sheaf. Okay, so now we're counting 50 sheaves. And it says in Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16 is where it describes this. It says, from the day that you offer the wave offering, which is first fruits, from this day, count 7 Sabbaths, or 50 days, and you come up to, for this year, Passover is April 11th, first fruits would be April 13th, so you start counting here. This Saturday would be the first Sabbath, second Sabbath, third Sabbath, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh Sabbath. And when you count the days, the 50th day comes up right here, June 1st. Now, if you Google Pentecost, it says that it's June 3rd to 4th. Can anybody tell me why 50 days comes up here, but they don't celebrate it till here?
Because of the Sabbaths.
They always move it to the next Sabbath, right? Or,
Well, I think it has to do with these 2 days right here. Because for the Hebrew calendar, they wouldn't have 30 days, they wouldn't have this 30th day and 31st day in their month,
Hebrew calendars only have,
28 or 29 days, because they're based on
Based on the lunar.
the lunar cycles.
oh,
Okay?
so if you take those
Well,
2
they
days
wouldn't have
out.
had April 30th either. I mean, they wouldn't have had that day.
Yeah, there would be another
In
day.
April, that'd be the
So that
third
would
day.
move it to the 4th.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that's how they always celebrate Pentecost on a Sunday.
Celebrate it on the first day of the week. Well, on the Hebrew calendar, it wouldn't necessarily be the first day of the week.
Yeah, it would be. I'm pretty sure Pentecost is always on a Sunday.
Okay.
We'll stop there.